Hello and welcome to the Fundamentals of SQL course. We are in our last section, which is the Create Table section. This section is going to be a little bit different, just because we are using Snowflake and we aren't using pgadmin or any other database like that. We are going to limit your role, so you will actually not be able to create tables and insert information into those tables or delete tables. That just keeps our database safe and our information safe for all of our learners. But we do have practice problems in Teachable where you can practice in a Word document and you can check your syntax against our answer key. So you're still getting that practice, it's just not in the actual Snowflake. So let's dive in. To create a table, obviously the goal is to just create a new table in a database. So our general syntax is just going to be, we're going to call that create table function. We're going to name our table, and then all of the information for our table is going to be in parentheses. So then we call each column that we want to create, so we name it, and then we give it a data type, and then a constraint. We'll talk about constraints after this. They usually just create rules for the column and the data type. So we call each column, we separate them by a comma, and we give them a data type. And the column parameters specify the names. So column 1 would be that column parameter. And then the data type parameter here specifies the type of data. So that's whether that's a variable character, an integer, a date, etc. So let's create a table. This table is going to have 5 columns. These 5 columns are going to be person ID, last name, first name, address, and city. And we're just going to call this table create table customers. So I'm using the create table function. I call the name of the table that I'm creating, which is create table underscore customers. And then I'm putting all of my information that I want here. So first, I'm calling the first column, which is person ID. I want each individual customer to have an ID that is unique to them. So this is going to be a number data type, and this is going to be a primary key. This is a constraint that makes each number or ID unique to each customer. Then I have my comma. I call the first name because that's a new name for a column. This is a variable character, so it's just like a string. And then we limit that to 255 characters. So we do the exact same thing with last name. Last name is a variable character. It's a string, and we limited it to 255 characters. City, country, and phone number. Notice how the phone number is a variable character, just so it gives us that flexibility of a string rather than making it an integer. And then if we input or somebody else inputs a phone number with different types of characters inside of it, not just dashes or underscores or things like that, it won't break the query. So the person ID column is of type number, and it's going to hold an integer. We discussed that the last name, first name, address, and city are all variable character strings, and they hold just characters. And the maximum length for those fields is 255 characters. You can set this to whatever you want. You can set it to 10, 15, 20, any integer. And the empty persons table, after we create this table and run it, so let's run that. 1 row, table CT customers successfully created. Wonderful. So now let's select all from CT customers and see what we see. Great. So we should have a blank table. Person ID, first name, last name, city, country, and phone number. That is beautiful. That's exactly what we want to see. Now let's dive into the constraints. So these are just to define the rules for the values that are being stored in that column. So they're used to limit the type of data that we can be inserted into a table, and they can be classified either into 2 types. You can use constraints for a column, and you can use constraints at the table level as well. So these are declared at the time of creating the table. So here's a list of sample constraints that we can use. Not null, you can make sure when you're using the constraint not null, this identifies that that one specific column cannot be empty when we're inputting their information. Unique, it doesn't allow a duplicate column or a duplicate value for that column, and it maintains that uniqueness. The primary key enforces the table to accept that unique data, and it creates a unique index to access the table faster. And our foreign key, it just creates a link between the two tables by one specific column. Our check, you might not use this or the default, but I just wanted to expose you to what they do. The check controls the value in the column. It determines whether that value is valid or not from a logical expression. And default, each column must contain a value. If no value is supplied, then the column gets the value set as default. So the sample syntax, just like we did in the create table, we create our table function, we name our table, we state our column name, the data type, and the size of our limit. We give a column constraint if we need to, and then we give a table constraint if we need to. And then we just repeat until we're done. Ooh, let's make sure we have our parentheses here. And those are constraints. So now let's say we have our blank create table, but we want to insert information into this table. Well, we would use the insert into function. So the goal of this is just to add new data into a database. This adds a new record to the table, and it can contain values for some or all of the columns that you want. So this can be combined with a select statement to insert records. The general syntax of an insert into is just to state insert into the function, call the table, call the column names, call out values, and then we're going to input those values separated by commas. So what this looks like, and I didn't want to type all this out live, I wanted to be able to break this down with you. So what we're doing is we are going to add a record for a new customer, and this customer is going to be Craig Smith. He lives in New York, and we have his phone number. So we're going to call the insert into function, call our table, our CT customer table, and we're going to call the columns that we are going to input all of our information. So we have our first name column, our last name column, city column, country column, and phone. So those are enclosed in parentheses. Great. Now we call our values function, and we input all of the information we have for Craig Smith. So we have his first name, his last name, his city, his country, and his phone number. Great, so we run this, and now we have our number of rows inserted, and we have 1. Great, so let's just check to see that everything went right. So let's select all from CT customers. And we can select all since we only inserted 1 row into this new table. Great, so now we have our person ID of 1, our first name Craig, Smith, New York, USA, and his phone number. Great, so let's add another customer. So we have John Paul from Minnetonka, USA, and we also have his phone number here. Notice that we have to add a person ID and specify what ID they have. This is different from other databases in SQL where you can add a serial integer and it will do it for you. But we will manually enter just so we get that practice. So we are inserting into the CT customers table. We call out all of our column names. And we call out all of our values. So this is the person ID of 2, John, Paul, Minnetonka, USA, with his phone number. Notice that since this is a number, it's going to be an integer, so it does not need quotations. So let's run this script. Great, number of rows inserted is 1. So we can go back up here. We can select everything from CT customers to make sure that we have that second customer in there, and we do. That's incredible. So now we can add a new customer, Anita Coates, to the database, but we don't have all of our information for Anita. We just have her ID, her first name, and her last name. She's still setting up her information. So let's run that. And then we can select all to see our new table. So now you see that we have her ID, her first name, her last name, and anything we didn't input is just null. But if we would have used a not null constraint on her city value, it would have returned an error. So maybe our phone number is so important to us as a business that we might have to put a constraint on the phone number to make it not null. So every customer can have one.